A shout out to all of Unfound's supporters at Patreon, PayPal, and YouTube. You make this content possible. Kimberly Ann Moreau was a 17-year-old from Jay, Maine. She was very popular and close to her sisters. On the night of May 10th, 1986, a Saturday, Kimberly was allegedly dropped off down the street from her house by a guy who had been with her all day. Kimberly never arrived at her home. She was never seen again. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. Given the format of Unfound, we measure the ages of the disappearances covered here in years. In fact, many years, with the average age of a case being almost a quarter of a century old. Yet, every single one of these disappearances starts by being only 1 second old, then 2 seconds. Then, unfortunately, they get to minutes and days and months, and sometimes decades. And we even have several disappearances we've featured that are easily over a half-century old. Evelyn Hartley, Bill Underhill, Marianne Verdecchia, to name just a few. But we've also covered how extreme the range of disappearance realization can be. Tiffany Johnson was only out of sight of her brother for 30 seconds, yet she is still missing. Susie Lyle's walk to her dorm was only a minute long. Despite that, somebody certainly abducted her. Milda McQuillan was only 2 minutes from her destination, yet she never got there. Allegedly. Whereas Eric Franks' family didn't realize something was wrong for about 8 months. Well, with the disappearance of Kim Moreau, she told her sister she would be back in an hour. But here we are in 2024, and Kim's family is still waiting. What happened in those 60 minutes? And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Linez's website, charleyproject.org. If you've seen a picture of Kim Moreau in the run-up to this episode, then you should not be surprised when I say she was a popular girl, especially among the boys and maybe some girls too. But there was more to Kim than that. She had a 9 out of 10 brain to go with her comparable looks. Kim was friendly, loved to talk. Most importantly, Kim was close to her family. They always came first. She seemed to have a firm base on which to build the rest of her life. However, problems had popped up to undermine that foundation. Kim's quality of friends had decreased, and she had probably started to use drugs. So, on May 10th, 1986, a Saturday, early in the day, Kim was with a female friend, and they decided to jump into a car with that girl's boyfriend and his friend, both very much older, to ride around the Jay, Maine area. Seemingly, and despite the big age difference, everything went fine. And that night, Kim came home for a few minutes to go to the bathroom. Her sister saw her. They spoke briefly. Nothing seemed amiss. Kim was not drunk or high or anything. Nothing seemed to be wrong with her. She said she would be back in an hour. Brian Enman, one of the two older guys, would later say that he dropped Kim off down from her house early in the morning of May 11th. She was never seen again. He says he does not know what happened after that. The topic of popular women and the men around them has popped up many times on this podcast, going back to the Rebecca Gary episode from 2017. Please contemplate how that might be a factor in Kim's disappearance as you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, Why would a close female friend keep her mouth shut if she knew something about Kim's disappearance? Number 2, are the words of Brian after the disappearance not as suspicious as they appeared to be at the time? And number 3, could damage to the car Kim was in that day, seemingly done around the time of her disappearance, be an unlikely clue for her case? Kim's family certainly believes foul play occurred. The guests for this episode are Kim's father, Richard, and her sisters, Diane and Karen. Unfound news. This coming Monday, February 12th, is a big day for Unfound. There will be a press conference at 10 a.m. Eastern here in the United States, where the resolution to a disappearance Unfound featured will be revealed. I think it will be streamed live. Please look for posted links in the Facebook group and on the page. Once again, Monday, February 12th at 10 a.m. Eastern. Next, Dr. T and I had another great time on her show this past Thursday, February 8th. We discussed what I consider to be the most important case from a learning point of view that Unfound has ever covered. The 2012 disappearance of Crystal Morrison, who was found in 2019. If you missed it, please find it on Dr. T's YouTube channel. Finally, keep your eyes and ears peeled for the interviews with my assistants Carrie, Emily, Eric, and Cherie that I've done over the past month. I'll be releasing them one by one. You will certainly find them interesting. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the father, Richard, of Kimberly Moreau, and her sisters, Karen and Diane. Richard, Karen, and Diane, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to do it. Let's start here. Let's just talk about, of course, being that we have the father and two of the children, I think we're going to get a pretty good idea of this. Just talk about the Moreau home of the 1980s. I'm a child of the 1980s. I'm 53 years old. I think the demographic for Unfound is a lot of people in their 50s, so they remember the 1980s well. Richard, Karen, and Diane, just maybe give us some memories of the Moreau house of the 1980s, if you could.
Well, in the 1980s, I was working in the paper mill. I worked shift work. We were a typical family. Had my 3 girls. We had, my first wife was going through, in the 80s, she was going through cancer. Oh my. She was doing well, but going through cancer, and we would sit down as a family and we'd always talk about what was going on and what we could expect to see from the doctors. And,
yeah.
It was really a very typical family.
Yeah.
We had, we turned around and as it went, there's 3 years apart between each of the girls.
Okay. All right. So there are three children, and Kimberly is the baby, and they're 4 years separating the three of you.
No, 3 years apart.
3 years
They're
apart.
each 3 years apart.
All right, I'm bad at
Like
math.
Kim will be 55 right now, Karen will be 58, and Diane will be 61.
Okay.
Kim's birthday is January 21st, 1969.
Okay.
Her birthday was Sunday.
Okay.
So.
All right, so there's a 3-year gap between the three of you. She was the baby.
Yes, she was.
Okay, and how did the three of you all get along as sisters?
I was fine because I was living out of the house.
Okay. All right.
I was the oldest. I'm 6 years older than her.
Yeah.
So Kim and I got along fine. She wanted to use my car. She'd be using my car. She'd have to bring me someplace, drop me off, and then she'd have to come back and get me. The deal was you put gas in the car, otherwise you don't use it.
Right. Okay. And you had been out of the house for how long? Several years? Just a few years? Or after you
Several
graduated
years.
high school, or what?
After I got out of high school, I left.
Okay.
I had been out at least a couple of years of the house.
Okay. All right. So we have the 3 daughters, and Kimberly being the youngest, her being slightly older than I am. And if, I don't know, you don't have to, but I'll ask, what do you remember? Of course, your mother was suffering from cancer at the time. I'm guessing you remember it the way your father does. Very difficult time.
Yes, very, very difficult time. Bringing you back and forth to radiation and chemotherapy. This is something that no families should ever have to go through. And then we're trying to deal with that, and then Kim disappears on top of it.
Right.
It's not something any family should have to go through.
Right. How do you, if you could speak, of course, for Kimberly, who's not here to speak for herself, same thing, very difficult. What do you remember about Kimberly and the relationship she had with her mother, and Kimberly finding out that your mother had cancer? How did that go for her? I mean, obviously very difficult, but, what kind of relationship did she have with her mother when that happened?
She was like the rest of us. We were all stunned.
Yeah.
We did anything and everything we could to make my mother happy and try to make her transition into this cancer world a little bit more easy, which is not easy going through it.
Right.
She had breast cancer, and then it moved from her breast, it moved into a lymph node, and then it moved into her liver. And then they said there was nothing else they could do for her.
Right. Yeah, and the probably listeners have known me for a long time, know that both of my biological parents died of cancer. But they, I guess your mother was very young certainly to my biological parents, who died like in their late 70s into their 80s of cancer. So this is certainly tragic. Certainly.
I was 48 years old when my mother died.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that.
Well, the other thing too, she was doing very well with her cancer treatments up until the time that Kim disappeared. Mm-hmm. Then all the additional pressures of Kim disappearing and us trying to get help to get people to investigate this just put all that additional pressure on her, and we've always felt that that's what caused her to pass on.
Yeah, that happens.
The extra added stress.
Right.
Nobody should have to have that.
I mean, there was financial stress on there as well as just the regular stress from every day.
Right.
Going nuts. Because at the time, in order to make a phone call 10 miles away, it was a toll call. At the time, and we were spending anywhere from $600 to $1,000 a month on top of all of our other expenses.
Yeah.
Just on telephone bills.
Yeah, hospital bills and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yep.
Cancer, of course, can get very expensive very quickly.
Yes.
Very quickly.
Yes, it can.
Okay. Let's move on to this now. Please, go ahead. Please.
You haven't heard from me. I'm
Go
Karen,
ahead.
And
Go ahead.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Kim.
Please, go ahead. Let's do that.
Kim and I shared a bedroom for a lot of years because of living in a trailer and having Kim by my side. We used to lay in bed and talk sometimes. And I want you to know that Kim was a beautiful girl. Mm-hmm. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and I'll politely tell you that she could get a boyfriend with no issue. Mm-hmm. She was a beautiful girl. She was somebody who liked to dance. She wanted to be a model. Kim had lots of people around her that wanted to be her friend. Kim wanted to fit in and just be liked.
Yeah.
Kim was a cheerleader. She was always active, always in crowds. And I just want people to know that there's a lot more to Kim's story and how much we miss her than just her disappearance.
Of course.
She was alive. She didn't deserve this. And my family needs closure. We need somebody to pipe up, tell us where her remains are, and let us process our grief, because although we've been going through this for 38 years, we have so many unanswered questions. My mother, my grandparents, and my aunt are all buried in one cemetery, and we have a headstone for Kim there. We hope someday to lay her to rest beside my mom.
Right.
We always hope that in heaven they've been reunited, but I honestly feel that Kim can't be at peace until this is closed. I consider Kim a lost soul, and my family needs help that we still, to this day, 38 years later, are not getting. And we've gone through hell, and no family deserves what we've been through.
Right. I hear you. Doing this for 7.5 years, I think this is like number 325 of the disappearances that I've featured on my podcast. So, similar sentiments by many of my guests, especially for disappearances that go back to the 1980s and 70s, especially. Yeah.
And it's very sad that so many other families are out there.
Yeah. So you were the one that got to share a room with Kim. Would you say that you two were very similar? Would you say she's like the polar opposite of you? How would you explain your person? How would you explain?
We're so different.
Okay.
Kim,
Different in good ways.
Kim and I were more alike than Karen and Kim were.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So Diane and Kim kind of alike, but Karen and Kim a little bit different. Okay. That happens in I guess in families. Everybody's a little bit different. So so we have this. Maybe just to ask you a little bit more about Kim. Let's move on to this. Of course, there's her disappearance has been in the media quite a bit over the years, and there is talk about this boyfriend. We don't need to get into his name, but how much do you want to say about him? What was being Karen, that you were like the middle one and still, I guess, we're at home. What can you say, or maybe Richard, you want to get on this as well, is that this boyfriend, we don't need to get into names, but how serious was it? What can you say about this boyfriend that she was with at the time of her disappearance? Of course, not with him, but, in a relationship with him at the time.
Well, I would say that he turned around and they were quite serious at the time.
Okay.
A couple of days before she disappeared, she caught him in bed with one of her friends.
Wow.
And that's where all the problems started. There was, so that's where everything is. It was coming up to junior prom night and so forth, and that's where everything went the other way. Because she was mad at him, and she wasn't talking to him, and she wasn't seeing him, and so forth, and that's where everything went the other direction.
Okay. Now, Richard, I have to ask you, Richard, is this, being that I don't know, I don't have any kids, by the way, but I was a kid at one time. Is this something that you found out right away that she caught her boyfriend doing this, or was this something you did not find out until after she went missing? Do you remember?
Well, I didn't know about it until after she disappeared.
She did. Okay.
But there was a lot of people that knew about it before.
Okay. And I'll ask Karen, being that you were still living at home, we've established that Diane was out of the house by that time, but I'll ask Karen first. Did you know about this when it happened? Did Kimberly come, to you and say, "Hey, this is what happened"?
No, I think I wasn't living at the house at the time, but I think Kim was embarrassed of what he was doing to her, and she didn't want to tell people. I mean, her friends knew because they were around her, but as a family, I don't think any of us knew it until we started investigating and trying to find out where she was. And then we started digging things up.
Right.
You got to remember, she disappeared in May.
Yeah.
We did not have any real police help until September.
September.
So we were doing all the investigation, and we were finding out all these different things. And everybody was just trying to keep everything hush-hush from us.
Okay, so somebody else told you. It wasn't the boyfriend that told you after she went missing. It was somebody else told you that they had this falling out because, I don't know, did she go over to his house or whatever, and she caught him with another girl.
It was one of her close friends that told us when we picked the telephone up, and we started calling around seeing if anybody had seen her, because we could not get any help from the local police at the time.
Okay. Did this boyfriend... Please.
All the local police kept telling us was she was a runaway and not to worry that she'd come home.
Okay. That happens. Not saying I agree with it, but we know that happens, especially when it's teenagers. That happens to this day in 2024. And I don't know why they do that. Is this something that did the boyfriend eventually confess to this when he was confronted? Did he say, yeah, that actually happened? Did it happen? Did he admit to it?
He wouldn't admit it to any of us, but we did find out later on from other people that it did definitely happen.
Okay. Did this friend...
That was the whole problem.
And what about this, once again, just want to make sure we understand this and we can move on. Did this friend who was this allegedly good friend of Kim's who was with him, did she admit it? Did she finally come forward? Yeah, that happened. I'm really embarrassed by it. I'm sorry about it. Did she admit to it?
Yes.
She did. Okay. All right, so they have this falling out there, and he gets caught with her good friend, and this is just something to keep in mind. And, of course, she goes missing not long after this. Let's move on to this. Was Kim, she has this boyfriend, but they... Please.
The one that he was in bed with was not Kim's good friend.
Oh. Okay.
She was friends with her, but not a good friend.
Not a good
How's
friend.
that?
Okay.
Somebody she went to school with.
That's it.
They went to school, they got acquaintances through school and all of that stuff.
Okay, so
her
this...
friend was the one that told her that it was a good friend, but she wasn't.
Okay. All right. So a girl that knows Kim ends up with this boyfriend, and I don't know if we need, once again, if we need to go any deeper into that. We just need to know they had a falling out not long before her disappearance, and this is the reason. Moving on. Was Kim involved in any bad crowd or anything like that? Besides, the boyfriend doesn't sound like a very good guy, but was she, what kind of people was she hanging around with at the time? Good people? Were you a little worried about this? Maybe one of the sisters wants to talk about this, maybe because they might know a little bit more about it, at least at the time. Either one of you, what can you say? Kim hanging around, good people, or maybe going the wrong direction?
Kim wanted to fit in. Kim wanted to be liked, and Kim was more or less a follower. Kim wanted to be in crowds and so forth, and got her mixed up in some bad people, things that we had a very small community.
Yeah.
And everybody seems to know everybody else, so you know who the partiers are. And she got involved with the partiers.
Mm-hmm. Did that surprise you?
Which isn't a good thing at 17, and I know that, but it wasn't... Kim was efficient. She was just trying to fit in and... maybe getting a little rowdy, trying to follow the group that she was involved with.
Okay. And is that how the other two, is that how you remember it as well? Maybe Richard, were you aware of this as her father at the time? Of course you know now, but is this something that you were aware of at the time?
I only know of a few people that she was involved with.
Mm-hmm.
One was supposedly the one that she was with that day was Rhonda.
Right, we're going to talk about her.
we know that Rhonda was hanging around with a rather rough crowd.
Okay.
She was hanging around with some people that were doing drugs and so forth. And
Rhonda was also a neighbor.
Okay.
We waited with Rhonda for the bus every day.
Wow.
She was somebody that lived very close to us. So point blank, when you're in school, it's hard to not see people because you're riding the same bus, you're at the same bus stop, and so forth. Rhonda really came into Kim's life, like, I'm going to say 6 months before she went missing.
Okay.
And in being at the same bus and doing the same routine, you get to chit-chat with people. So Kim, wanting to fit in, followed Rhonda around and unfortunately became involved in a rougher crowd. But I want to point out, too, Kim went to school every day. Mm-hmm. She had a job. She worked at McDonald's. She had her own car. She just was a very busy girl. It's not like she was a doped up druggie that sat on the couch and did nothing. She was a 17-year-old energetic person that really wanted to just have fun with life. That's why cheerleading and dances and lots of people.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so this maybe this could just be a phase. We know a lot of teenagers maybe get with the wrong crowd and they work their way out of it, and then some people don't. This could have just been a phase for her. It just very could have simply been a phase, and by the summer of that year, that those people could have been in the rearview mirror. Of course, we'll never know that now. Moving on, just in general. Who are Brian, Darren, and Kelvin? Of course, we're going to get into them specifically later, but in general, who were they? Were they friends of your family? Were they known to all three of you before she went missing? What can you say about those three, just as a whole?
Kelvin was the only person that we knew.
Okay.
He used to run an arcade place in our hometown, and that's the only reason why any of us knew Kelvin. He wasn't a very good guy. Kelvin is somebody who has killed another girl. He took her for a car ride, and they got into an accident. Instead of taking her to the hospital, he put her outside the car, propped her against a tree, and she died. He is also known for biting a chunk out of a game warden's face.
Wow.
Kelvin is not a very, very nice person. Brian and Darren are somebody that I have still to this day. I've only met Brian once, and that was when we were interviewing him. And I've never met Darren. The only reason why we know of these people is they were drug dealers.
Okay. Going back, of course, you're going to bring up that somebody died in Kelvin's presence, a woman died in Kelvin's presence. When did this happen? Was this before or after Kim's disappearance?
Before. That's happened in about 1978. 79.
All right, and what do you remember this woman's name? If this happened.
Yes, her name is Cindy Fournier, and Kelvin was much older than her at the time when this happened.
Okay, and all three. Please.
Kelvin liked to hang around with the young people because he could control them and makes them do whatever he wanted. Actually, so you could be like little puppets of his.
Okay. And so what we're also saying is all three of these guys well into their 20s. Well, of course, we know Kim's age, but these guys were all very much older than Kim would have been at the time.
Yes. Brian and Darren, I think, were close to 25.
Okay, and Kelvin, just an approximate, around the same age or even older than that?
Maybe right around the same age. Might have been, I'm not sure. It could be a year younger. Very, very close to the same age.
Okay, and so we're all these guys, and once again, we're going to talk about them extensively a lot deeper later, but all these three guys, very close friends, all three of them together, like three peas in a pod, or what?
No idea. Never knew them.
Never knew them.
It's hard to tell if they're friends because I never knew them.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. All right. Let's just some just general questions before we get into May 10th, and we'll get into why that date has got confused, because we had that conversation before we got started. And if you have an explanation for the dates being wrong, certainly the audience wants to hear it. But just at the time overall between the three of you, given that we just talked about, of course, this breakup of the relationship, not Kimberly's fault, but maybe going in a little bit of the wrong direction. Any worries about Kim? Was this just teenager stuff? Any talks with her, with you, the two sisters? Any talks with her about what she was doing with her life? Any concerns about Kimberly at all in May of 1986?
No. Kim had lived away from us for the summer before because she worked in Farmington, Maine, which was where McDonald's was, where she worked. And it was a 30-minute drive. So the summer before that, while she was working, she had asked my parents, I have a place to stay in Farmington. I'm going to be staying with these people, and is it okay? My parents gave her permission to stay at this place. When she was living there, we saw her more than if she was living at the house, because she used to call every day to find out how everybody was doing, just making sure that we all kept in contact with her every day. She wasn't somebody who just all of a sudden took off and went somewhere and didn't answer you. Okay. She was always there and was willing to be, willing to sit down and talk to you.
Sure.
And all of a sudden for her to disappear and have nobody give us clues as to where she was or why this was going on, it made our life wonder, and still to this day makes us wonder how this could happen without any of us knowing.
Right. So I guess overall, not a lot of worry regarding her. Any concerns about anything going on in her life at that time that you thought was dangerous? And for all three? None. Okay.
No.
Very good. That's all. You knew her. Please. Please, I'm sorry I missed it.
No, that's okay, and it's harder on the phone. We can't tell who's talking.
That's all right. You go ahead. You just, I can, at this all, it's all going to sound great. If you had something to say, go ahead and say it, please.
Kim disappeared May 10th.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times the confusion with the date is because I say she disappeared at 11 o'clock that night.
Oh, I gotcha.
I came home. I was at home and Kim drove in and I talked to her at 11 o'clock that night. And she told me she was going out for a ride. She'd be back in an hour. I had no reason to say that I felt Kim was in danger that night. She did not come in the house that night tripping and slurring words and falling down. She seemed happy. She was upbeat, the same old Kim that I knew any other day. So I just want you to know that I was the last family member to talk to her.
Yeah.
And there were no doubts, because if I would have thought Kim was in danger, I would have jumped in front of that door and never let her go out. But I had no reason to fear that she wasn't telling the truth, and I had no reason to think that my sister wouldn't be coming back in an hour. If Kim was going to run away, she had a car in the driveway. She had makeup and a purse and belongings at home. Kim would not have ever left home willingly without bringing a lot of her possessions, because Kim was very prim, proper, and she would stay at home curling her hair, putting on makeup. She wanted to look just so before leaving.
Let's just set this up maybe a little bit. Being Karen, that you were there, and but for the both of you, of course for Diane and Richard as well, what is your understanding as to what went on earlier that day before Kimberly came home and Karen, you saw her? What is your understanding for the timeline before on May 10th? Your understanding.
She was out with Rhonda.
Okay.
Rhonda saw these two guys, what would be Darren and Brian.
Okay.
They had a brand new car with 10-day plates on it. And they wanted to go for a ride. So the two guys picked them up and put them in the back of their car. Well, they took them around. They started doing some drugs. They were drinking, I think. I'm not sure exactly if they were doing drinking at that point in time, but they were riding around from town to town to town and just having a grand old time.
Okay.
That all started at about, she left the house around 11:15 that morning. They walked down to a park, which is about a mile away, and that's where they were down there just leaning against the wall talking when Darren and Brian came by.
Right.
They seen him and they went around and they came back. They got talking with them. They got in the car. They rode around town, and so forth. And they went out of town. They came back in town. And
okay.
This all happened the day of the prom that they were supposed to.
The day of the prom.
That she was supposed to be attending with her boyfriend. So she's just trying to do something. So she's not thinking about what she should be doing with her friends.
Right. Okay.
She's
Gotcha.
not there anymore.
All right. So she's just joyriding around, like, as a Gen Xer. We all remember these days. Of course, this is days before internet and phones and everything else. Just joyriding, going from town to town. That's what they were doing that day.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Very good.
Gas was a lot cheaper then. We could do it.
That's right. And, I need to work this out with Richard. Of course, Richard and I were the ones that had the first conversation. Richard, did we ever figure out what kind of car this was? What kind of car was this?
Yes, Monte Carlo.
Chevy Monte.
1986 Monte Carlo. Chevy Monte Carlo.
Oh yeah.
And I know they say Trans Am, but if you look at the two cars that year, they're almost identical.
Right, Monte Carlos. I, of course, remember this. Fantastic cars. All right, now we got, so it's a Chevy Monte Carlo new with 10-day plates, and, these guys are trying to impress a couple girls with it. Okay, gotcha.
And just so that, because we don't know for sure that it was a Monte Carlo, you should say, or a Trans Am.
Or
please.
a Trans Am. Okay, gotcha.
All we know for sure, it was white.
It was white. Okay, very gotcha. That all makes sense now. Thank you. Now, Karen, being that you were the one who was home, you saw her when Kim came home, and she was just home for a few minutes. Do you have an impression? Of course, if you knew what was going to happen, you would have paid a lot closer attention. We totally understand. We get it. But were there things that she brought in that she didn't take back out? Why did it look like she came home for just those few minutes? If she's just out joyriding around, why did she just come home for a couple minutes? Can you even tell that now, Karen?
She came in to go pee.
Oh, did she?
They were closing by and she had to pee.
Okay.
She had to use the restroom.
Okay, I had to ask. All right, so it's once again, something very innocent. And it was convenient. All right, very good. That's why I asked these questions. It wasn't something any else other than having to go to the bathroom. We get it. And you said she just seemed like herself. I have to ask, did it seem like, I just have to ask, did she seem like she might have been drunk or high, or did she just seem sober, just regular old Kim?
Regular old Kim. I talked to her. She seemed happy. She seemed chipper. She was not bouncing around drunk. It was my sister.
Okay, great. So she comes in, and Richard, you worked at night. Is that the reason you weren't there? Was Kim's mother there? Was anybody else there, or Karen, you were the only one who saw her?
No, Karen was the only one.
No.
Karen and Bob were the ones that saw her.
My husband now was there as well.
Okay.
We were dating at the time, and we were both home, and Kim came in.
Okay. So the boyfriend you had at the time, you're married today, here in 2024.
Yes.
Oh, congratulations. Yes. Good for you, Karen. Very happy for you. All right.
2 kids and a grandson to prove it.
Great. That's a great story. Okay, thank you. So You and your boyfriend at the time, future husband, were there. So she comes in, and any talk, being that there was somebody else there, who of course you're still married to, you two have obviously had a lot of time to talk about that night since then. Was there anything that your husband noticed at the time that maybe you didn't, or it was just like, yep, just regular old Kim? Has he ever said anything?
My husband is the one that actually saw the car.
Oh, he did?
I was sitting, yes,
Okay.
he's the one that saw the car. And you figure, it's 11 o'clock at night outside, and we knew it was a sports car. I really wish today I had been more motherly and asked lots of questions. But we chatted for a minute, and it was just everyday talk, you know?
Okay. All right, so we have two witnesses there. She's just being herself. You thought she would be back in an hour, and of course we know that she didn't come back in an hour. She didn't seem stressed or anything like that. So the night goes on, and of course then eventually we go from May 10th into May 11th for all three of you, or whoever. When did somebody start noticing that something wasn't right here? She was supposed to be home. Who was the first one that noticed that?
Well, when I came home with my wife, because we had been across the street, she was about, and she was working at the VFW, and when we came across the street, she turned around and we got home, and first thing we always did is checked on the girls when we got in. We went in and checked, and she wasn't at home. Well, that was very strange, because here it is, it was after 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
So we thought that was strange. Asked Karen about it. Karen says, well, she said she'd be right back, Dad. And so I says, okay. So we went out in the kitchen, and my wife and I sat down, made some coffee, and sat there and started talking. At 2:45 in the morning, she wasn't home. I knew something was up.
Okay.
But she had never done that. We went to the police station. They told us that they wouldn't take a deposition for at least 48 hours to go home, and that she'd be back home.
Okay.
So we went back home.
Okay.
48 hours later, we're back at the police station. He didn't want to take a deposition then, and unfortunately, I got a little rude, and
I think that's understood. Everybody understands that.
Said, you are going to take a damn deposition one damn way or another.
Okay.
I said, you're running us around here in circles for nothing.
Okay.
So finally, the chief of police was sitting there. He says, oh, just take his deposition. That's just the way he said it.
All right.
So the officer sitting there turned around and took down the deposition at that point. Now, that's as far as that went.
Okay.
That I may as well filled out a piece of paper and thrown it out here in the wind and just let it blow around, because that's it. That's as much as would have been.
Okay.
So
now I have to ask for all, and I want to ask all three of you, being that the police blew you off originally, and then 2 days later they took the report, but as we know, it was basically just a formality, and they didn't seem to be taking it seriously at all, as Richard just explained.
not at all.
In those 2 days, in those 48 hours, did the names, did Brian's name come up? Did any other names come up? Did Rhonda come up? Did any of you contact any of them? Did you even know where to look or who to call about during those 48 hours? Being that the police weren't going to do anything, did you try to talk to Rhonda or anybody else? Hey, where's Kim? Where did she go? What'd you do?
Instead of talking to Rhonda, they got a hold of Rhonda's mother.
Okay.
Who was Jean Breton.
Okay.
And they tried talking to her and getting information from her. And
She didn't want to be involved.
she didn't want to be involved.
Okay. And
That's
she's
all we've ever got was nobody wants to be involved.
okay. And to remind everybody, she's your neighbor, right? She lived right down the street.
Yes, lived down the street and up a side road.
Okay, very good. And was she?
From where we stood at the bus stop,
Yeah.
we could see this woman's house.
Okay.
So it's not like she didn't see us.
Okay. In your opinion, would you say, once again, just an opinion, would you say that her mother, Rhonda's mother, was trying to shield her daughter from being questioned about Kim, in your opinion?
No. I just think that she thought that we were just making things up. And that they didn't want to be involved.
Okay. Okay. And so Rhonda was...
I remember that is that night
Please.
that she disappeared too, and
Yeah.
is that it was 38 degrees outside.
Oh, yeah.
The only thing Kim was wearing, she had on a short sleeve, white blouse, a pair of dungarees, and a pair of high top sneakers when she left the house and was going to be back within the hour.
Okay.
And
Mm-hmm.
that never came to fruition,
Right.
as we all know.
Right. And, maybe that's, 38 degrees being dressed like that, of course, is not smart. But we also have to realize that when she left the house that day, it was daylight. And maybe it got up into the 60s that day. That time of year in May, and May can drastic temperature changes.
It was nice that day, but it had cooled off that night, and it was down to 38 degrees when she dropped her little jacket and her purse and everything else off at the house.
Okay. Now I should ask, this friend Rhonda, we're going to get into her later because of some things that happened to her, but so she was like Kimberly's age, like 16, 17, 18 years old, somewhere in there?
She was Kim's age. She was in the same class as Kim.
Oh, okay. And so do you think during that 48 hours before the police took the report, do you think that she knew that Kim was missing?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
All
She
right.
knew.
Okay, but she never came over to your house to say, here's what happened that night or anything like that?
No. I was at a bar one night. Kim disappeared in May. This is New Year's Eve the same year.
Okay.
Well, starting the following year.
Okay.
I was at a bar room, and Kim was there, and excuse me, not Kim. Rhonda was there,
Sure.
and it took 7 people to hold me off her because I was trying to ask her to tell me where she was,
Wow.
and she didn't want to open her mouth, and it took 7 guys to get me off this girl because I was going to kill her.
Okay. All right.
Because in my
I
mind,
get it.
I still say she knows what happened. And with her just hiding it, all she was doing is hindering what these other people, which we don't know who they are for sure, but these other people that did something to her, she was hiding it from them. Kelvin was also known that when he hurt Cindy Fornia and killed her that night, that there was other people that were in the car with him, and he told the other people right then and there, you keep your mouth shut, you open your mouth, and I will make sure something happens to you too.
Okay.
So Kelvin was a real crooked person that everybody was afraid of, but wanted to be his friend.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so we have all this going on, and in fact, Rhonda, who Kim knew well, knowing from the bus stop and school, the story is that those two and these 2 other guys were out together all day, but then Kim goes missing, and Rhonda just avoids talking to your family totally.
Yes.
Okay, all right,
And
okay.
she stayed with Darren. She continued to go out with him even after Kim disappeared.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to this then. So it's very important. We're going to come back to Rhonda here in a moment. But when did, so we know about, you just mentioned him, Darren, but what about Brian? When did his name get into this? Because if you go forward, this is just an example. If you go to the Charley Project, his name is the first one mentioned as he was driving the car and everything. When did his name first come up? And you did say that you actually talked to him, so why don't we talk about that right now?
Same time.
Same time. Same time as Darren.
Okay.
Because they were best friends, and Brian was driving Darren's car around when he took him to work, because Brian supposedly dropped Darren off at work and then continued riding around with Kim and Rhonda after he brought him to work.
Okay, so that's the story. So if we're to believe this, I don't know if this is true or not, but So Kim comes home, she goes back out, she gets in the car, and then one of these guys gets dropped off at work.
No, before Kim came home.
Before Kim came home.
He had to be to work. Yeah, this guy was going to be working 11 to 7 shift.
Okay, great.
So he had to be in work in Rumford for 10:30 at night.
Okay. And so it's after that then.
After the fact.
All right, very good. So then it's after that that Karen and her future husband see Kim come home, go to the bathroom, then leave again. So it's then Kim, Rhonda, and Brian.
Correct.
All right, very good.
At least that's what we think.
Okay, that's once again, if that's all the information we have, and we realize something went on in here somewhere, but that's the information that we have here in 2024. By the way, we're doing this interview on January 25th of 2024. All right, so...
I wish I would have got up and looked out the window. Yeah. I wish I would have asked even more questions.
A lot of...
we know that the white sports car was there. Mm-hmm. We cannot say who was in it for sure.
Okay.
They couldn't see from where they were.
Okay. But it makes all the sense in the world logically, and it makes all the sense in the world if it is true, that's factual, that Rhonda and Kim were with Darren and Brian that day, then it makes sense that that is also who was outside that night. Right? That would make sense.
Agreed.
Yeah. That the three.
We just want to make sure that the facts are brought out.
Yep.
We know what was told to us. We know, or we believe we know all of these scenarios, but it's from what we've been told through our investigation and sorrow of 38 years of looking.
Okay. Now, as I think was stated very early on, and Richard, I think you said this, that yes, you just mentioned within the last few minutes that the police grudgingly took this report 48 hours after Kim went missing. But early in this conversation, you said that really nothing really got done until like August or September of that year. Is that true? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
That's because they sent the paperwork. The paperwork was supposed to go from Jay Police Department to Farmington. They put it in one of those little file holders, and it never got moved from where it was supposed to go to where it was supposed to go.
She never got listed on the NCIC computers, what Diane's trying to tell you, Ed.
Yeah. Okay.
She never got listed on that because that night there was they had other emergencies going on. The calls came in. Just like everything else, the paperwork got shuffled, it got put underneath, and it was 4 months before it ever got listed. Mm-hmm. And that only got listed after we finally got state police down there, and that's when we started getting help.
Okay. Let's just be very accurate regarding which police department you're talking about who blew you off. Which police department?
State Police Department at the time.
Okay.
Reported. They called Farmington, the Farmington Police Department, which was a sheriff's department up there.
Okay.
And they were the ones that were supposed to put it on the NCIC computer, and they never did.
Okay.
Upon the state police finally coming and getting involved in the case, and the only reason that they ever got involved, and this is what the detective told me,
okay,
was basically to shut us up because we were calling everybody in the state. I mean, I called the governor. We even called Ronald Reagan.
As you should have.
My family has a letter from Ronald Reagan begging him for help. My daughter's missing. We need help. And he basically replied to us and said, good luck in your search, but there's nothing that I can do for you.
Yeah.
In a nice way.
Yeah.
It was so frustrating because we were running around begging for help. We were looking at local TV stations, newspapers, putting up flyers, doing anything just like today to keep Kim's name alive and get us answers, and unfortunately, we're still without answers.
The only thing that ever got us to get beyond the J Police Department was the fact that we had recorded every single phone call we made, what time of day it was, how long it was, who we talked to, and exactly what was said.
Yep. Good.
And when the state police detective came in and he sat down, we had all these pamphlets all printed out. There was over 140 pages in it, I remember that. And he sat down, he said, well, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? And we'd tell him, page such and such, page such and such. Call, look here, look there. And he started looking, and at that point, that's where he determined that that Kim was not a runaway. She was missing and endangered, and that's when he got right on the phone. He called the Farmington Sheriff's Department to have it listed on the NCIC computer, but this is 4 months later.
This is at the end of the summer, into the fall of 1986.
He had arrived at the house the detective arrived at the house at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he never left there until almost 8 o'clock that night, and that was Detective Richard Pickett.
Now, the big question here, once this all started to started to pick up some momentum, granted 4 or 5 months later, which is horrible. When they finally talked to Brian, what did Brian, if you know, would like to hear it, what did Brian tell the police about that night? Did he admit that he was even with Kim that night and Rhonda? Did he admit that what did he admit to regarding that night or early that next morning?
He admitted that they were together, and that after they left here, left the house.
Okay.
That they turned around and they went on one of the party spots, what is called Piss Hill.
Okay.
And that they had, and this I want to be very specific about.
Yeah, please.
He stresses that they had consensual sex because he knew that Kim was younger than him and he was over 20.
Okay.
But he knew Kim was a minor. And he stressed that they had consensual sex. And then after that he came down and they dropped her off down here where they had met her that morning when they were first riding around. And then later on, he changes his story. Okay. Now, this was at midnight.
Okay.
Then he says later on, he drops her off at 1 o'clock, only it's in another whole different area of town, down here by the monument, right in town.
Okay.
And that is at 1 o'clock. And then he changes his story again, and he has it at 2:45 in the morning. That he dropped her off.
But none of the...
3 different times that he's telling us.
All right, and just so the listeners can get an idea for this, who is he? How did you find out about these stories, and how far are these different stories spaced apart? Were like a week apart? He told someone 1 week, and then somebody the next, or is this 3 different stories over 5 years or something? Just to give us an idea.
No. These here are just weeks apart.
Weeks apart.
They're just they're a matter of only a few weeks apart.
Okay. But in none of those stories, I guess, is he saying, well, yeah, I took her home and dropped her right off at her doorstep.
Right. He's saying that, number one, he wanted to bring Kim home, but he says that she didn't want that because she was really confused on what was going on with her life and everything, and she wanted to think about it and walk home. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all because Kim was totally afraid of the dark, and if she was next door, and when I say next door, I'm talking 20 feet from my doorstep, and she was coming home, she would call the house, tell us to turn the light on, that she was coming and somebody to stand on that porch, and she would run from one house to the other. The other thing was, here she is in only a short sleeve shirt, 38 degrees, and she's going to walk up about a half a mile to get home? Yeah. No way. No doggone way in heck are you ever going to convince me of that one.
And we also have to remember that just seemingly an hour or more right before that, she just got dropped off at the house so she could go to the bathroom.
Right.
So he had no problem dropping, if we believe it's him, he had no problem dropping her off right at her doorstep for that. But then later, he's saying, oh, she's all confused about her life, so I couldn't drop her off at home.
Right.
Okay.
She didn't want that going on.
Okay.
She wanted to think.
All right, so he's changing his stories multiple times, and we'll come back to him a little later. But we're now going to move on to Rhonda. Of course, we've mentioned her. She was with Kim that day. Might have been out at the car when Kim went back out to the car after going to the bathroom and everything. What did she do with her life for the rest of the 1980s? I'm going to guess that the three of you and maybe others, did you continue to hound her about Kimberly? Did anybody else continue to hound her? Did the police talk to her? What went on with Rhonda for the rest of the 1980s into the 90s?
She graduated high school. As soon as she got out of high school, she flew the state. She moved to Florida. She lived there for a while. She came back, visited somebody here in the state of Maine, and dated. She was still dating Darren at the time.
Wow.
She and another guy at the same time.
Okay.
Then she decided that she was not going to stay here anymore, and then she proceeded to move to California. She gave up her kids to her sister because she said she couldn't raise it and she didn't want to have the child around, and her sister couldn't have kids, so she gave the child to her sister and moved to California. Then had two more children after that.
Okay, all by herself. Moved to California all by herself.
Yes.
Okay.
And she had two different children with two different fathers after that.
Okay. To your knowledge, I know that you've already talked about what you did at New Year's Eve, I guess 86 into 87, that you saw her somewhere and people had to keep you away from her, which I totally understand. Nobody begrudges you for that, of course. But do you know, being that we know what Brian's story is, of course it's multiple stories, does Rhonda have a story about that night into the next morning, and has her stories changed over the years?
Yes, she had said that when she got back out to the car, she decided that she was tired and she wanted to be brought home.
Okay.
And we don't know if she was ever dropped off at her house.
Okay.
Because she told the police this, that she was dropped off at her house because she said that she was tired and it had been a long day. There's no way Kim would have stayed in the car with somebody she didn't know.
Okay. And that's something that's important to understand, is that Kimberly and Brian really didn't know each other.
Not until that day when she got in it with Rhonda.
Okay. And the only reason she was there is because Rhonda was dating Darren. That's the only reason Kim was there.
Exactly.
That is exactly the only reason she was in that car.
All right, very good. All right, so Rhonda's like kind of bailing out of the whole thing, saying, yeah, Kimberly came back out to the car, but then I got dropped off right after that. I have no idea what happened after that.
That's what she's trying. That's what she tries to say.
All right, that's what she's, I guess, stuck to. Now, in a prior conversation I had with Richard, this is going to come up now. Richard had told me, if Richard, you want to talk about this, please do, that there was an idea maybe that at some point Rhonda might want to talk a little more about what happened. Maybe Richard or one of Kimberly's sisters want to talk about this. She's in California. Maybe she wants to come back and divulge a little bit more, but what went on?
Well, her sister had died of cancer here, and she wouldn't even come back home.
Wow.
But she was out in California. She had been in prison for a period of 18 months on account of she had forged some checks and so forth. She was on parole. She was in the process of trying to get her two children back. Mm-hmm. She violated parole, lost the children again, and so forth. And then I guess she just got fed up and wanted to come back home.
Okay.
And she called I'm not sure who it was up here, and said that she was coming back home and she was going to end this whole damn thing.
Wow.
And she was going to get this over and done with once and for all. Within a 2-week period, she was killed by supposedly a hit and run driver.
So she's like walking along the street or something, and a car hits her and keeps going.
Yep.
All right. And to the three of yours knowledge, and I know that you've had some help with the investigation of all of this, was that hit and run person ever caught in California?
Yes, he was.
Yes,
He was. Okay. What was just a bad, horrible accident or what? Any ideas?
Across the road, that's all I know.
We think that she was drunk and she was walking across the road and just got in the person's way.
Okay. And I did find the obituary for her. That happened in 2009. 2009, I did. Yeah, I think I found the obituary for her. So she...
And she is actually buried in the same cemetery where we want Kim.
Oh, my. Okay. All right, so maybe she had a change of heart. Maybe she knew more than she said all those years. Of course, we're now talking 2009, 23 years since 1986. And maybe she has a change of heart. Maybe she's growing a conscience or something. She says she's going to come back to Maine and maybe say, tell the true story of what happened that night. Unfortunately, she gets killed first, and maybe it's just an accident. Maybe she's drunk walking along the street and falls out in front of somebody, and gets hit. And, of course, that's happening all the time. It's very sad. Okay, so if she knew anything, she can't help us now. Let's move on to this.
Right.
We can't forget about this boyfriend who, was sleeping with a casual acquaintance of Kim. What did he have to say about this? Did any of three of you ever talk to him? Of course, I'm guessing he's like 17, 18, 19 years old, somewhere in that range. What did he have to say about Kim's disappearance? Was he helpful or anything?
No, he was a complete jerk.
Was he?
Me and Bob actually went and tracked him down because now I haven't got my sister, I haven't got answers, and I want anything and everything for information, and I want Kim's class ring back. Now, he was in a swimming pool swimming, and we drove up and asked him that, and he looked right at me with a smirk and said he lost her friggin' ring.
Yeah, we're gonna get
At this point, I want you to know I'm furious. I want to get out and I want to drown him because
I bet.
that just wasn't right.
Nobody.
And I can't.
We nobody. Of course, everybody I'm sure feels the same way you do about this. Same way. He's not helping. He's not being helpful. This is his girlfriend. Of course, he was the one that cheated on her with this other girl and everything, but you'd think he'd have some sort of, even if he doesn't know what happened, he would be a little more helpful and sympathetic and everything, and he was none of that.
No, I was at the time, I was bartending at a different bar that we had in our hometown. Now, I knew one of the guys that used to hang around with him, and I said to him, do me a favor. I said, just get him through the door. I'll be behind the bar working. It's not like I can do anything to him. It's not like I'm going to know who he is when he walks in. You're going to bring him in. This guy would not come to the town. He would not come talk to me. He would not give us the time of day. And it's like, why? You don't know me. I don't know you. All I want is answers from you. That's all I want is you to answer me a question. He would not come in.
Can I also tell you that Mike had moved on to somebody else already?
All right, Mike is the boyfriend's name.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. That's fine. As long as we don't use a last name, that's fine. Go, Mike. Mike's a common enough name. So he moved on to another girl, even though Kim was missing.
Yeah.
And point blank, it's like nobody wanted to help us.
Yeah.
The police didn't want to help. Her friends didn't want to help. And all my family knew was, we don't have her. And we're desperate for answers.
We're still desperate for answers.
I can understand that. I totally understand. I cover a lot of disappearances from the 1980s that are unsolved, all different types of disappearances, some like Kim's, maybe others where maybe foul play isn't maybe as probable. But yeah, everybody's looking for answers. It's what we're trying to do here at Unfound, get the facts and everything out there. You bring something up there about friends, though. Let's talk maybe about some of the friends that you trust. Of course, Rhonda, of course, can't be trusted, but what about, Kim's good friends, ones that are solid, men or women, boys or girls? What were their impressions about her going missing? What could they offer?
They were doing the same thing. They were asking questions. They were trying to get the answers. Everybody in the town went hush. It was like it was taboo. If you tried to bring up Kim's name, everybody just shut up and they disappeared. Nobody in the town wanted to even acknowledge that she was alive.
In the years, in talking to other people that didn't necessarily have answers, families were spooked.
Yeah.
We had some friends of ours down the road, and I've talked to her, and she says, parents started saying, we want to know more. Where are you going? When are you coming home? Who are you going to be with? All of a sudden, for a small community, everybody knew us. And my family was being put under a microscope.
Yeah.
Everybody knew who we were and what was happening, but we were almost like we were friggin' aliens because nobody wanted to talk to us, and not the right people wanted to help. We had people that wanted to try to help, but they didn't know the facts and they didn't know how to help. And then other people just basically shunned us. There's a lot of compassionate families out there who's tried to help my family.
Yeah.
But honestly, they don't have a clue what's going on. You can't give me answers if you weren't there.
That's right.
And there was a very, very small group of people that were actually there. I believe in my heart more than one person has an answer for us. And it can end. But we need that person to just
throw a pear.
Yes. No, maybe we should talk about this just for a minute. How big is Jay? This is Jay, Maine, Jay, like a man's name, Jay, Maine. How big is this town?
3,500 people.
All right, very small, like very similar to my town of
7,500 people in all, and that's involved in the whole community and around. You got Jay, Woodmore Falls, North Jay, and
Wilton.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about 7,500 people is what you're talking about, stretched out over a 20-plus mile distance.
Okay. And so it's, I have to admit, if you don't know, I'm originally from Leechburg, Pennsylvania, which is like 40 minutes northeast of Pittsburgh. And it's very similar.
Okay.
Same thing. 6,500 people in the town and like the surrounding townships, couple of townships there. So I'm kind of familiar with that same type of thing. Same type of little, town growing up there. And my high school class only had 71 people in it. Being that you all lived there, grew up there, can you explain that? How the town reacted the way it did? We hear so much about small towns, coming together and everything. This doesn't sound like that. So any insight from the three of you who have actually lived there?
Well, the only thing I can honestly say is that people were trying to give us moral support.
Mm-hmm.
But, they're hearing conflicting stories back and forth. is, and we gave them a story about what was going on with Kim, they would turn around and they would leave us. They would go talk to police. Police would say she was only a damn runaway and that she had done this thing before. So now we're being looked at as if we're a doggone bunch of jerks, and we can't control our kids and so forth. And I'm going through the whole scrutiny of that, as well as her mother, and of course my two daughters are going through the same thing.
Right.
And because of the scrutiny, that made at times stories not to be aired on television, because we would get a newscast to come over and interview, and then the story wouldn't be aired in the very beginning, or a newspaper article wouldn't come out.
Because the policemen were telling them not to air the stories. Yeah. And the best part about this is she never ran away. Not once in her life did she ever run away.
I believe you.
We never had to go searching for her.
I believe you. I believe you.
Everything about this whole doggone thing, Ed, turned out that we had anything that was going to be put on the open media had to go through state police to be even cleared. Yeah. So if they didn't like what we said, too bad. If we tried to make police look bad, oh no, you can't have that. So everything was just getting all filtered out. And a lot of times when we would have the story, and then it actually came out, like you said, we'd do an hour and a half interview, and you probably got, if you were lucky, you maybe got 30 seconds on TV.
Right.
With it.
Right. Totally true.
And
I know. And that's still, and unfortunately they still do that today. Yeah. Well, as you already know, I don't do that here. This interview is, we're about an hour and 20 minutes or something into it. It's all going to play, everything that all of you are saying. There's no filter here, but I know, and I know you probably don't follow other things that I do, but just certainly within the last few months, I've been kind of on this kick that, sometimes police get more in the way than being helpful. And one of the ways is they try to spike stories. If there's going to be a disappearance story, the police know you can't print that because this still happens to this day in 2024. It still happens.
Oh, I believe it.
It still happens.
I fully believe it.
This is something you might have to take this out of the interview.
Well, you just, I'll determine that. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm going to tell you this. This is something we were told back then. The police department, the chief of police told the other people that were working the case, either you stop working it or you're going to be fired. Now, how does a chief of police tell their people that are trying to help solve a person that's missing, no, you can't look for her anymore, otherwise you're going to be fired?
When did you find out about this? How did you find out about this?
Found out about it from the detectives that were trying to, from the patrol officers that were trying to work with us.
Mm-hmm.
Because they liked us and the chief of police didn't.
Why do you think?
I had two of the patrol officers I knew in town, and they were trying to work with us. Okay.
Did this chief of police have a reputation for any other sites of crimes and incidents in that area, or what was his reputation?
He was brought from a different area because he was fired from the other place for doing something wrong at that place.
Okay.
And something we didn't tell you, that night that Kim disappeared, there was a party at his house that his son was throwing. And he got home, and they were all minors, and he got home and realized that they were all drinking. And instead of making sure that they didn't drink, he told them to get off his, excuse my language, property.
Okay.
I won't say the word I want to say. But he was told that to leave. And he sent all these drunk kids out there on the road.
And then realizing what the heck he had done, well, if one of them gets in an accident, they say that they've been over to his house. Now he's going to get in trouble. He turned around at the time. Any call that came in was all recorded. It was handwritten because it was not all done electronically. He went up and he told the officers that responded, if I see a word about that on any damn report, you're fired. He went up to the dispatcher and he turned around and told him, he says, if a word of that appears in your log, and I know this because I talked to the dispatcher, he says, you will also be fired.
So does that sound
Nice.
like cover up to you starting it?
Well, I'll just ask this question. I guess we have to go here because I ask questions. That's what I do. Did Kimberly know the police chief's son?
Yes.
Yes.
We all did.
Okay. All right. Give everybody something more to think about. As long as it's factual, we can talk about it. I don't know if it's necessarily cover up. Don't get me wrong. I've covered a lot of insubordination and corruption of police departments and everything over my 7.5 years of doing this. And, certainly there are some police officers we've talked about who might be responsible for disappearances. It's not totally crazy. I don't know necessarily what to think here, but certainly it's a topic that's come up before. Certainly. So, okay. All right, so that gives something more for everybody. How long was that guy, the police chief of police? How long did he last?
Couple of years.
Couple years. Okay, well, what about the man or woman who took his place? Any better or what?
Absolutely better.
Okay.
He tried to rectify it wrong.
Okay. That's good to
He
hear.
tried to rectify it wrong, and he turned around and he would work with us, and he would try to go and get things done.
Let's move this back now to Brian. Of course, we've talked about him as different stories and claim he dropped Kim off the street. But Richard, you told me that he had made a statement to the police about, I don't know if they were asking, well, if we find her something, and Brian said, oh no, there's no hole in her head. What is that story? Maybe you want to recount that now.
Well, it was on her 17th. It was on her 17th anniversary that she was missing. Brian was out there talking with the detective that had the case at the time. They were driving around over in Meadowview, and detective just kind of casually mentioned, because Brian would say, well, geez, I heard this, or I heard that, and I heard this spot. Well, detective would say, can you show me where that is? And they'd go out there and look. And detective casually mentioned, he says, after all this doggone time, Brian, he says, this is only a Class D misdemeanor, because it would be a hiding of a corpse is all it would be, unless we find her. And she has a hole in her head. And those words came out of his mouth, and then right behind it, Brian says, oh no, she ain't got any hole in her head.
Oh, is that right, Brian? How do you know that? That's...
Oh, no.
Yeah.
They never asked him that.
They never asked.
Why would they ask those questions?
Right. Why would they ask good questions?
Never been asked.
Okay.
And then if I talk to the detective today, detective says, well, no, it really didn't happen that way. Then I said, what the hell did you tell me that for?
Mm-hmm.
You lying to me? So I says, I can't believe you either.
So on the
So what am I
17th
supposed to
anniversary,
do?
so this is like 2003? Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It would have been 2003.
All right, now I have to ask you, what is, just in general, we're going to talk about Darren and Kelvin here in a bit, but what has Brian done with his life since 1986? What kind of life has he led?
He's worked on a farm,
Okay.
because that's what he's done most of his life, driven truck and so forth, and worked on the farms. And the other thing he does is he drinks.
Okay.
He loves to shoot guns.
All right, so he's still alive here, to your knowledge, in
Oh,
2024.
Yep.
38 years later, so he's like 63. 63
Yeah.
years. Okay. All right, moving on, let's talk about Darren. Now, Darren is the one who claims that he got dropped off at work before Kimberly got dropped off to go to the bathroom We have to remind everybody, it was actually Darren's car that was being driven that night.
Yes.
All right, it was like a Trans Am Monte Carlo, something like that.
Right.
But it got wrecked. This is once again something, Richard, you told me before. I don't know what to make of this, but we'll talk about it. At some point shortly after Kimberly's disappearance, the car got, it looked like it had been sideswiped. What can you say about this story?
The only thing I can tell you for sure on that is that the car was sitting over in his sister's dooryard.
Mm-hmm.
I talked with the gentleman that used to do body work up in that area. Darren came in, gave him $4,200 cash, told him he wanted that car fixed and he wanted it kept quiet. Get rid of whatever parts he had to get rid of and do that. But he wanted that car repaired as if nothing had ever happened to it. And this car still had 10-day plates on it.
So, as best as you three can...
that did it
please,
is dead.
Please. Okay.
The gentleman that did it now is dead. Andy Dubois.
Is it your impression, the three of you, best as you can tell, do you think that, once again, it wasn't necessarily wrecked? It sounds to me, of course I didn't see it, but it just got sideswiped. It was like it was still drivable, but it brushed up against something or something.
Went down the passenger side.
Right. As best as you can tell, could it be that this car got damaged that way on the night or early morning that Kim went missing? Or does the timeline work out or not?
I can't tell you that for sure, but it had to be very close to that.
Very close.
If it wasn't that night, it had to be very close because this here is now less than a week after Kim is gone.
Okay, very good. All right, so we have to keep that in mind that maybe, possibly, that this car was fine on the day that Kimberly and Rhonda they were riding around in it, but then just a few days later, the car has been sideswiped, and it could have happened right around the time that Kim went missing. I think it's just something we need to keep in mind. Now, you did yeah. So how could that figure into all of this? Did you tell me, Richard, that this car was actually eventually tracked down? That he got rid of it, but like years later they tracked it down or something?
Yes, the car had three owners.
Okay.
One was Darren. One was a woman up in Farmington, Maine. And when she sold it to a police officer in the Rumford Police Department. He was a lieutenant. That got tracked down, and it was almost 18 years.
Wow.
Afterwards, they found out that the car was there. When I made a suggestion to him one day, I said, "Jesus, we've got the whole automotive bureau down here. You mean to say you can't find out who owns the car?"
Yeah.
And geez, you know what? Remarkably, within a week, they found out that this lieutenant over in Rumford owned the car. Well, the car was brought down to Augusta, and they did DNA testing and everything on it then.
Okay.
But I mean, this is almost 18 years later, so
that's true.
We didn't find it.
I know 18 years, that's bad news, but I can tell you in a lot of disappearances I cover, police don't do anything. Certainly cars could be involved in disappearances, and they don't bother tracking them down at all. So, all right, so they found this car, forensics done. Of course, that was 18 years after she went missing, 2004, so that's 20 years ago now. Regarding Darren, do you have any idea? Of course, his story is that, I got dropped off at work before Kim even got dropped off to go to the bathroom. Does this story hold up? Is there anybody who vouched for him at his work or his job, time slips, anything like that? Do any of you know?
The only thing that we can honestly say is there is a time slip that he checked into work at 10:20 at night and was punched out at 6:20 in the morning. Mm-hmm. But it was not uncommon back then that you could have picked up a phone and called a buddy up and said, "Hey, I ain't feeling too damn good tonight. Cover my damn job and punch me in and out in the morning."
Okay.
Punch me in, punch me out.
All right.
We know there's a time slip there for him.
Okay. So the last time, just to say for Darren, what Darren is saying, the last time I saw Kim, she was with Brian and Rhonda.
Yep.
Okay.
I also want to add in that me and Bob tracked down Darren.
Okay, tell us.
We tried to talk to Darren. We pulled up beside him and asked, "Where is Kim?" And he said, "I don't know Kim." And it's like,
The other one.
yes, you do know Kim. Kim was with Rhonda on May 10th. And his answer to me was, "Oh, was that her name?"
Wow. Okay.
He got really angry, peeled out of the parking lot, squealing tire, and drove away.
Okay.
And I got very defensive because, in my opinion, right from the start, it was that her name? It sounded so past tense to me, and maybe most people wouldn't take it that way.
Okay.
But to me, it felt like she had already passed and he knew it.
Okay. when was it? Yeah, you're gonna have to.
Otherwise, it is that her name?
Yeah, you're gonna have to tell us, when did this happen, Karen? When did this happen?
Within days of Kim
Going missing. All right.
being
So.
missing.
All right. So this could have easily been actually in May of 1986.
Definitely.
All right. So you see him. He doesn't want to talk about it. He squeals out. He doesn't want to be patient with you. He doesn't want to be sympathetic with you. He just has things to do. And we also have to remember Darren was still dating Rhonda at that time, too.
Right.
Okay.
In August, both state police and local police saw the car parked with it still had 10-day plates on it.
Okay. All right. This Monte
Because
Carlo
Darren tried to
Trans Am.
Darren tried to return the car and they wouldn't let him take it back.
Okay. All right. Allegedly lets his buddy, Darren goes to work, he lets his buddy Brian drive it. A few days later, it's sideswiped. Still has the 10-day plate on it months later. It may be a little confusing to people because not every state handles like car registrations and things a little bit differently. But it was like what you're saying, a 10-day plate. It's like a paper plate. It's made like out of cardboard or something.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
temporary plate you're given when you buy it.
Right. Okay. Whereas, if you don't know this, only because my family was in the car business back in Pennsylvania in the 1990s. In Pennsylvania, you don't get paper license plate. You actually get a metal plate right from the start. So, it varies from state to state. So, if anybody's wondering what they're talking about, this 10-day plate thing, you get this paper plate, and you have so many days to go get the car registered. So, okay.
Right.
Okay, very good. Now, though, with Darren, Richard, you told me about the story in the 2000s where, just like Rhonda, maybe Darren felt like he wanted to start talking as well, but what happened?
Well, Darren had got picked up for dealing drugs. And he was dealing drugs directly to a federal narcotics agent. He had 4 charges on him for dealing drugs in his school zone, 3 directly to a federal narc. He turned around and he was trying to make a deal with the district attorney that he was going to give us. He said that he would give us Kim.
Okay.
And then some smart lawyer opened his mouth and said, "Listen, just keep your mouth shut. I'll get you out of it." I know that I've got a real good friend that was working in the mill with him at the time. It turned out a few months later, my friend asked him, he said, "Geez, Darren," he says, "how the heck did you ever make out with that whole doggone charge that you had going on?" He said, "Well," he says, "it cost me most of my 401k, but," he says, "I don't know, somewhere between $70,000 and $100,000 I get off." Well, with 7 charges, he ended up getting a year's probation, $1,000 fine, and it all wiped off his record after a year. And you tell me somebody along the line didn't get bought off on that one, and I'm going to tell you that I guess I'm more stupid than I think I am.
What gave you the idea that maybe Darren was, who told you maybe that Darren was going to have something to say about Kimberly's disappearance? How did you find out that at the time? The detective.
The detective that had the case at the time.
Okay. All right, so a lawyer gets in the way of that.
Right.
Okay. And what has Darren done with his life? Doesn't sound like he was doing too well when that happened. What's he done with his life since?
Nothing.
Well, his house just burned down last year.
It did. Okay.
I really can't tell you anything beyond that point. All I know is anything. One of the things I can tell you is that when they went into his place to serve him his papers when they arrested him, they went in the garage and he had a stack of posters of Kim that I had put up on telephone poles, and he had a stack of about 2 feet stacked right there in his garage. He takes them down, but he can't get rid of them.
So you were putting up flyers and like posters and things, and he was going around taking them and collecting them?
Correct.
Wow.
I put them up, and within 2 hours they were already down.
And how long, being that somebody saw the stack, how long could have been doing that to collect that many? How long had he been doing that?
I started doing it in, around 2002 or 3. I started doing that.
All right, so 16, 17 years later, and already then he sees those, and that's when he starts collecting them, stealing them.
Okay. We got to go back. This is about 5 years ago.
Okay, go ahead.
No,
This is about 5 years ago that he was arrested.
Oh, yeah, 5 years ago. So is it your impression then that those posters and everything sat in his place for all those years?
yes.
Oh, yes. He kept collecting them.
Oh, my goodness.
Because I put them up.
That's a
I
new
put
one.
them up, and I had a friend of mine that was sitting there, and he was watching it, and says, I drove off, and it was in 10 minutes later, he was out there on a step ladder, and he was taking it back down.
And the 3 of you were not aware that he was the one taking them until this person saw them in there.
Right, you actually see him do it.
Oh, my goodness.
We know that I've still got them that disappeared today. I put them up, and I still have some disappear.
Yeah,
I put
that
some up here.
happens a lot.
You got to realize something else too.
Go ahead.
Some people, I had somebody at work that told me that they had seen somebody covering up Kim's poster with a yard sale sign. We've had posters that Kim's eye was then cut out of. There's a lot of weird things that people do that you don't always get answers for.
Right.
And some people just want to turn around and they just want a poster.
Yep.
Well, all I've ever said is, if you want a doggone poster, just call me up. I'll gladly give you one. Because the cost of putting up one of these posters, we have special tape that we're using. We're using racing tape. That costs you like $11 a roll. Well, sometimes by the time you laminate it, you get this tape, you put it up in and run the doggone telephone pole. You don't get too many times around the telephone pole where a roll of tape is gone. So the expense gets up there rather quickly. So just call me up. I'll give you a poster. I'll even give you one that's all laminated.
Did Darren ever give an explanation of why he had all those posters in his place?
No.
Okay.
All I know is that I had a friend of mine that asked him about it, and he told him, get the hell out of there and get out now.
Right. Okay. All right, that's a first. That is, I've heard a lot of crazy stories, as you can imagine, over the last 7.5 years, 300 some disappearances. That is a first. Let's move on to this.
That's called a trophy.
Excuse me?
I say we call that a trophy.
Yeah, I do. Good. Especially since it seems like he did it like years after she went missing. You know, these posters were not once put up in 86, and then he's going around in 86 and 87 and taking them. He's doing this in the 2000s.
Right.
Well, the reason being is I didn't start putting them up until the early 2000s.
Okay. Yeah.
And when I started putting them up, he's working in the mill. His name is on it. Brian's name is on it. And he's got guys coming at the mill and saying, hey, what the hell's this? Geez, I see a picture of that girl that's missing, and your name's on it, and Brian's name's on it, and all of this. So I guess he figures if he takes it down, people ain't going to ask him about it. I don't know. Okay. I'm just giving you my summation of what I think.
I gotcha. Let's move on to the third guy that has been mentioned prominently of this trio, and that is Kelvin. Now, I have this story here. Of course, we've talked about how he got in this car wreck. A young woman died back in the late 70s, and we know that. But did he somehow end up, this class ring conversation came up maybe a half hour ago, just in passing, but I want to come back to it. Did Kelvin end up with Kimberly's class ring?
Yes, he did.
How does he say that happened?
Because the person who had it gave it to him for alcohol. Or sold it to him for alcohol.
Okay. How did you find this out? When did you find this out? When did this?
We found this out with Detective Richard Pickett when he went down to Pennsylvania. He was down there serving federal time down there for narcotics, selling narcotics, and he was down there. And Detective Pickett went down there and started asking him if he knew anything about it. He says, oh, yeah. He says, you go home, tell my mother to look up in this certain cupboard here. And he wrote her a note. And the ring was in a doggone envelope. So we got it back. That would have been 90, probably 91, 92, somewhere in there.
Okay, so seemingly...
Somewhere in the last part of the 80s, early 90s.
So he had her class ring for multiple years.
Yes.
And he says that going back to the boyfriend, so the boyfriend had this ring and he traded it for alcohol to Kelvin.
Yes.
So that is, I guess, what we're saying also here is that is how well Kimberly's, I guess, ex-boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, I guess, that is how well this boyfriend or ex-boyfriend knew Kelvin, good enough that they would trade beer and a class ring.
But before he gave it to him, he tried pawning it in at a local pawn shop that we had in our town. And the guy said no. He figured out whose ring it was, and the guy would not take it from him.
Wow, so Kelvin ends up with a missing girl's class ring somehow. And can it be verified either way?
We actually have somebody who actually saw him wearing it for a while.
Okay, so, but I guess what we're also saying, though, is Kimberly was not wearing her class ring at the time of her disappearance, or yes or no?
No, she was wearing Mike's when she disappeared.
She was wearing Mike's. All right,
yeah,
so they
Mike
traded.
had hers, and she had Mike's.
Okay.
Being teenagers, they exchanged rings when they were dating.
Yeah, I remember those days. Right.
A lot of times, girls used to wear them on chains around their neck because the rings were too big to fit on our fingers.
Yeah, that's right.
And therefore, we'd wear them on necklaces, and that was just a very common thing.
Okay.
And because they were dating, they had each other's rings.
Right.
It was either that or you used an awful lot of tape on it. You had about an inch of tape on the bottom.
Either that or yarn.
Right.
Yarn.
I guess what we're also saying, though, is...
Boyfriend,
Please, go ahead. Please, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
but also you have to think of it this way. Now, Mike is telling the police that he doesn't know where the ring is. So he's lying to police that he's tried to pawn it in. Then he sells it to Kelvin.
Yep.
So he knew what he was talking about, but he's lying to police about it.
He lied to me about the ring, and that was right after her disappearance.
Why would, I have to admit, I'm not a beer drinker at all, and I maybe had a class ring, but I don't even remember. That seems like a weird trade. You trade a class ring for beer. Wouldn't Kelvin rather have money, or what was going on there? That seems weird.
No.
No, this is another trophy.
That's a trophy for Kelvin.
It's a trophy for Kelvin.
But
Okay.
Mike was into doing a lot of drinking at the time, and he was on the verge of being an alcoholic at the time.
Okay. So Kelvin has the beer.
He just traded off the ring. Give me something to drink, and I'll be happy.
Okay. So when they went to talk to Kelvin, and of course, I guess he eventually admitted he had this ring, I guess. What does he had to say about Kimberly's disappearance? Kelvin, being that there was this car wreck where one woman already has died, what did he have to say about Kimberly's disappearance?
I don't know her. I used to call him every day while I was still at work when Kim first disappeared. Like the first week or a week and a half after Kim disappeared. I'd be at work and I'd call home to my mom and I'd go, Mom, any news? And she'd go, nope, still haven't heard anything. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm still on break, so I'm going to call Kelvin. So I'd pick up the phone and I'd call Kelvin and I'd say, hey, Kelvin, this is Diane. He'd say, yeah, what's going on? Well, Kim's still missing. Do you know anything about it? No, I don't know anything about it. I don't know nothing about it. And he'd just act like he was completely stupid.
Okay. Do we happen to know, of course, we know Brian's alibi. We know seemingly maybe it's a lie, but we know Darren's alibi. What alibi does Kelvin have for that night? Does anybody know? Has anybody checked that?
No, we've never heard any alibi on that night.
Nothing.
The only thing that we ever was told is he was riding around.
We were also told that he was at Farrington's party. He
That was
pulled
the
in
chief,
real
the chief
quick
of police.
and then turned around and left because after seeing who was there.
All right, the chief of police's party?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So he was out. He was probably out there somewhere that night. Okay. So we got these three guys. We got Brian. We got Darren. We got Kelvin. We got the ex-boyfriend who, of course, knew Kelvin well enough that they would trade a ring for beer. He knows at least Kelvin. And we have these stories. We have Brian telling multiple different stories. And, of course, in my opinion, as a person who just is finding out about Kimberly's disappearance recently, his name seems to be the most prominent. When people write about Kimberly's disappearance and who might be involved, Brian's name is most prominent. He's told different stories. He's driving somebody else's car. This car somehow got at least partially wrecked, although it was still drivable around the same time that Kim went missing. Kim that night, Karen, you see her. She comes home to go to the bathroom. She seems like Kimberly. She's not drunk. She's not worried. She's not stressed. She's smiling. She's eager to go back out and continue on with the night. Says she'll go back be back in an hour. And never, of course, comes back. I want to ask you this. Regarding, as best as you can tell, after Kimberly leaves the house, is there any confirmed sightings of her with Brian or anybody else that is believable? Or is it just like nobody seemingly saw her after that?
After that, it's like she just absolutely vanished.
Okay.
Rhonda's the only person that says she saw her after that. But after
Right.
leaving the house, it's like
Right.
she just disappeared from the face of the earth.
Okay, we have to remember
Brian
Rhonda.
also admits to be with her.
Right, okay.
Brian admits it,
Yeah.
that he was with him, but that's it. That's the only two that can ever say anything. We have not found anybody that would confirm that they could honestly tell us that as an example, at midnight, they saw Kim.
Right. This area that you had referred to, kind of a parking spot, I guess, for teenagers and other young people, is, of course, Brian said, as Richard, as you said earlier, consensual sex. Brian, I guess, really, really stressed that. Nobody saw that car that night. No witnesses seeing a car up there like of that description in that area that night. Anything like that?
No.
And where would?
Absolutely no way.
Okay. And what about Brian?
When she left,
Please.
it's like when she left the house, she vanished at that point.
Got it. What was Brian's living situation at the time? Was he living by himself, with his parents, with friends? Where was he living at the time? Do we know?
He was living at home at the time. He was living with his mother.
Okay. So there's that as well. All right. Over the years, I have to ask this. It just isn't very clear to me, but I don't know the area. Any searches ever been done? Any organized searches? And where would you even begin to look? Of course, we hope that Kimberly might be alive out there somewhere, but if she's not, where would you even begin to look in something like this? And if you have searched, how do you determine those areas?
The very first search that they did that I can remember
Was
volunteers. We got everybody together at our local church. We all met in the parking lot. Everybody was given an assignment. Certain people went to a pond that we used to go to. I was one of the ones that went to Piss Hill, you had heard about earlier.
Yes.
Now, everybody was given certain areas. We were all told to go out. We were lifting up leaves. We were moving logs. We were looking under anything that we'd see. Now, everybody is out there, and if a bird would move in the woods, now everybody jumps because it's something that's not supposed to, it's even though it's supposed to be there, we're not supposed to be there. It scares the living jeebies out of us. Nobody should have to go out there and lift up something hoping that you don't see your dead sister underneath it.
Of course. Yes.
We want to stress that in the very beginning, where we weren't getting help from local law enforcement and friends, your family gets desperate. We did talk to some psychics trying to get help. And psychics, one of the things that they told us was, look for something with the letter P. So that's why Piss Hill, parks, ponds, stuff like that. They also told us that she was very close to home, but she was deceased. And she was by water, by a tree, by a rock. Well, the stupid thing is that's every friggin' part of our town. There is
our whole state.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I don't take psychics seriously at all, and that's the reason we don't talk about them. I don't ask about them during interviews that I do for the podcast. The next time they solve a disappearance will be the first time. So I know what you're talking about. They're just not helpful at all.
It's not helpful, but you got to understand the mind frame of a family that is desperate for help.
For sure.
Desperate.
For sure.
They were at least willing to work with us.
Yeah.
I turned around and paid Sylvia Brown. She was on Maury Povich.
Wow.
I paid her $600 to give us information that was so far off track that it didn't even make sense.
Yeah.
Sylvia Brown is also the person where the girls were missing in Ohio, and she told one of the mothers that she was not around. Well, she was in the house. She was still alive, and the mother died thinking that her child was dead.
Yep.
And she's still very much alive today.
Yeah, Ariel Castro, the guy that took those.
That's correct. Ariel Castro.
Ariel Castro, right? Okay.
But she told her mother she told one of the mothers, no, she is very, very much dead.
But even today,
I don't talk to psychics. Don't believe them.
I want you to understand that.
Yeah.
Yes, we have we have continued for 38 years. We have continued to do searches every single year with all the information we get from people, whatever tip it is. We go out and we continue to do searches. And some of them are all with police, with the dogs and so forth, and I'm not even allowed to be on a search with the state police any longer, which I think is neither here or there, but
BS.
we aren't going to go down that road.
Yeah, BS.
But the other thing is that we have done countless searches. I spent an entire summer actually clearing swamp because of information that we had got. Mm-hmm. And when I say clearing it, I mean I said just as clean as a doggone middle of the road. And then turned around, metal detected it, and did the whole doggone thing. So, yes, and that was all I was doing this here when my wife was dying.
Right.
So I'm trying to bring her home.
Right.
Something that we've done is we have on Facebook.
Yeah. We
have a page that's called Kimberly Moreau Missing in Maine. Mm-hmm. And it's we have a chat group. We have over 7,300 members on this page.
Excellent.
Where we put in things all the time. We're trying to update people with what's going on, trying to get information from them, seeing if they have something new. We have people from all over the world that is in this page. We put things out there. The other day, like I said, 4 days ago was Kim's birthday, so we posted a picture of Kim on there. And saying that it's been 55 years instead of being with her. She would have been 55 today. Instead of being with her, it's 38 years we're missing her. Mm-hmm. Hopefully she's in heaven having a party with our family that's up there, but we want her back on earth. We'd love to be able to have her here with us to be able to prove that she's not missing. That would be such a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it would.
It's sad to say, but wouldn't it be nice that she'd be like these girls that were with Castro?
Right.
She's locked up in some home somewhere. That's horrible to say, but that's really sad that we think that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
On that page, there's a video of Kim that was created years after she went missing, and somebody took one of our pictures, and it actually has Kim looking around and smiling at us. Let's just say it's an amazing thing that this can be done through technology of today, because when our family first opened this,
it was like she was alive.
Yep. I've seen those done. Yes, I've seen that. Seen those done. I want to ask you about those, maybe even we'll just include the ex-boyfriend in here too. This sometimes comes up in disappearances that I've covered, so I'm going to ask you about it. Any stories from women who dated these guys after, where maybe one of these guys got angry and said something along the lines of, if you don't behave yourself or you don't shut up, I'm going to do to you what I did to Kimberly? Has anything like that ever come up over the years with any of these guys who we talked about during this? Because, like I said, it comes up, once in a while on these interviews that I do. So I'm going to ask you, all of you, have you ever heard anything like that? Any women kind of saying, well, he talked about Kimberly in not very good terms?
I talked to a woman who told me that she got in a car with Darren, and she really feels that Darren was a rapist, and she felt her life was in jeopardy, and she had a car that was broke down, and said that Darren was going very fast, and she felt very unsafe and felt that he was bringing her to a location she didn't want to be in. Mm-hmm. And she freaked out and got out of the car, and to this day says that he still gives her the heebie-jeebies.
Great.
But I don't really know this woman or her character.
Right. Is this something that came over like through Facebook or something?
There was also a girl named who was afraid of Kelvin, and she said that she felt like Kelvin was also that way and creepy and just out to make sure that she wouldn't be able to tell the stories that she wants to tell.
Okay. Why don't we let's not forget, of course, Kelvin in this car wreck from the late 1970s. Why don't you give that woman's, she got killed, I guess, in a car wreck while Kelvin was driving. Let's not forget her either. What was her name again? And maybe why don't you spell her last name as well if anybody wants to look that up.
Cindy Fournier. Fournier.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna look some more into that myself. I think throughout this, of course, we've been going for about 2 hours now. Totally fine, not unusual for the interviews that I do. Obviously, for all three of you, we can hear your pain with Kimberly's disappearance. And of course, I also know, although we've not talked about it specifically, I guess that your mother died of her cancer just a couple years after this, 87, 88?
She died in 88, May of 88.
88, okay.
In 86, we lost Kim. In 87, I lost my grandfather. In 88, we lost my mother.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
And I was working at the International Paper Company, and the strike in 87, I had to work through that strike in 87 while my wife was dying.
Yeah. Okay. Oh my. Okay. How was this? Obviously, this is has affected your total lives, and I realize that even if she were to turn up alive tomorrow, that still your lives have been always affected by this. For Karen and Diane, how has this affected you as women? Of course, you maybe becoming parents with your own kids, and how has this affected the two of you as you've,
I never wanted kids.
Okay.
I don't have children.
All right, me
I
neither.
never wanted kids. I don't want to have to deal with going through this.
Yeah.
No family should have to live through what we have.
Right.
I can tell you I have 2 kids and I have a grandson. And for me, before Kim went missing, I thought of the world as a very different place, a very safe place. After Kim went missing, I never felt safe anymore. I did things like get into a vehicle and look in the back seat.
Yeah. Yep.
Because is somebody out there looking to hurt me? I'd go shopping, have somebody approach me in a store, sometimes in a very unkind way, just wanting to talk.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, I'm working in a hospital, and I still, to this day, have people come in and ask me any answers on your sister. Sometimes people are just being compassionate, saying, hey, she's not forgotten. I'm sorry for your loss. I hate to hear somebody say, I know how you feel, because no, you don't know how I feel.
Way.
You have compassion. You try. But you don't know what my family's been through.
And then you also have the people on this end that will go, well, why do you keep looking? Why don't you just give up?
Exactly.
You're never going to find her.
Yep.
Why don't you just stop?
It's been so long. Why keep it going? She's my sister, that's why.
I can honestly say I made a promise that I would never stop looking as long as I possibly could. And here I am, 81, and I'm still looking.
Yeah.
I've recently gone through surgery. Don't make any difference. I'm sitting here, we're doing this. Don't make any difference. I was in the hospital, and I was thinking about what the heck is going on here, and what can we what's the next step that we can do that could possibly get us that one piece of information that we need just to find her remains. That's all we want. I don't care nothing about getting anybody prosecuted. All I want to do is get her remains home and get it buried side of her mother.
I want to say something about statistics.
Go ahead.
The National Missing and Unidentified Persons, which they also call NAMUS, says 600,000 people are reported missing every year. Yep. 4,400 unidentified bodies are discovered every year. Yep. There's one disappearance in the U.S. officially recorded every 90 seconds. Yep. 90 seconds, a minute and a half.
Yep.
We understand there's only so much law enforcement and they can only do so much, but what point blank pisses us off is when we're offered help and we are denied. We still to this day have been offered help, and the state of Maine will not let us bring in people that could help us get answers. And it's wrong, and every victim's family should be able to stand up and be held accountable to answer for our loved ones that aren't able. Nobody should be denied help, and nobody should have to go through the hell we've been through. We still want answers. Kim's always going to be my sister, but it's changed my life, and I miss her.
I should ask you, regarding, I mean, obviously we've talked about a couple different police departments, including the Maine State Police here. Do you have all the paperwork? Have you done a FOIA request for the paperwork? Have they gone along with that? Or have they kind of stonewalled you on that? The official paperwork, like the entire file that's been accumulated since 1986. Do you have that or what?
We have bits and pieces, but we've been denied. The state police will not work with my family and release those records to us.
They because they say it's an open case and we should not be included in everything. We should not know everything that's happened. Okay. Even though we've filled out the forms, we've turned it in, and we get rejected. But we've been rejected our whole lives, so why would we think it would be anything different now?
That's very common. It's always the question. Well, it's been, unfortunately, it's going to be 38 years here in May. And it's like, what's 38 years? When is good? 50, 75, 100, 200 years? I mean, are you saying like forever? It's just...
No, probably when we're all dead, then they might bring out something.
Yes, maybe.
That's how we feel. Like they just put us on the back burner, like they started at the beginning. We're still on the back burner. We try to get close to the front burner. Every time we get our foot near the burner, they pull us back 12 yards.
What about DNA? What year? I'm sure your DNA is in the database now. Who gave DNA and when was this done?
Karen and I both gave DNA twice. My mother has...
86.
It was 1986 the first time we did it. I don't know if it was later than that when we did it again, but my mother had breast cancer. And at the hospital where she worked, they still had
paraffin blocks that has her original tissue in it.
Okay.
So they had my mother also.
Okay, so what you're saying is DNA got done way, way, way back then.
Yes.
Okay.
We had a DNA collection, and then they updated it because of new technology and PCR testing and the way that they test it.
We've done it.
We've had blood samples drawn.
Mm-hmm. FBI came to the house and did it.
Yeah, good. Okay. Good.
And he offered us help too.
Okay.
Plus, we all have
Plus, we all have Kim's dental work.
All her medical
Right.
records.
All her medical records and dental work.
Yep, gotta have that. Okay. Karen, Diane, and Richard, any final words before we complete this interview?
Biggest thing is that we still know that there are people today that is out there that has information. It may seem like it's very minor. It don't make any difference. Call us and let us know, because if you let us know what information you have, then we can go from there. But the other thing that I want to stress, and I really want to stress this to everybody, is that just because you live in a smaller town, it doesn't mean that this very same thing can't happen to you. So talk to your children, turn around and try to get them, if they're going out somewhere, where are they going, and what the heck is, who they're going to be with, what time you're going to come home, and get these kinds of things in place. That's the biggest thing I can honestly say.
We would like to also say, if you have any information, please contact the Maine State Police. You do not have to give your name or your phone number. You can leave an anonymous tip. We need your help. We also have just want to find her at gmail.com. Just want to find her at gmail.com. You can leave something on there. We will gladly. You can leave it on Kim's page. There is, you can put it on Facebook. I mean, Kim's page is on Facebook.
Yep.
We'll listen to anybody who sends us a tip through Facebook. We just need somebody to send in more tips. The more tips we have, the more we dig, the more we try to find what we're looking for. And that would be my sister, Kim.
And Karen, any final words from you before we complete this interview?
Just the fact that we still don't have the answer we want. We will never give up. And we're going to keep right on begging for help and keeping her name and face alive as long as we possibly can.
Okay. Richard, Karen, and Diane, I appreciate all three of you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you for thinking of Kim and trying to help her family.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
For trying to help us. We are anxious to hear how you come up with composing this all so that we can get the story out for somebody new in your state who's never heard it before.
You're very welcome.
And that was the second part of my January 25th, 2024 interview with the father of Kim Moreau, Richard Moreau, and Kim's sisters, Diane and Karen. I thank all three for joining me and all of you on this episode. I also need to thank listener Michael, who suggested Kim's disappearance and put me in touch with her father, Richard. This is a disappearance where I'm sure most of you will be taking a long, hard look at Brian. And this makes all the sense in the world. His stories about that night seemed to have changed over the years. Why exactly didn't he drop Kim off right at her house? Why would he correct the investigator by saying Kim doesn't have a hole in her head? We can surely visualize a scenario where Brian wanted to do adult stuff and Kim didn't. A fight ensued and he killed her. This is a very common scenario of murder, not just in the United States, but all over the world. Rape leading to murder. Too common. This makes all the sense in the world, logically. However, we must consider the following points. Are we sure Kim didn't want to do adult things with Brian? She spent all day with him. She came home, then went back out with him on that Saturday night. And Kim, as her own family said, had already begun to make some questionable choices in her life. Really, and not to put too fine of a point on this, what does everybody think Kim planned to do for that next hour instead of just calling it a night? An hour where she was going to be alone with Brian after dropping her female friend off. But yes, Brian still could have wanted to go further than Kim wanted. Possible. Likewise, we must be open to the idea that Brian really did drop off Kim down the street. Why would he and Kim do this? Maybe Kim wanted to sneak into the house. Car headlights and the sound of the engine would get in the way of that. Hey, we've all been in that situation if we had a social life in our teenage years. Lastly, Brian would be a perfect suspect if we didn't have the recently jilted boyfriend in the area who cared so much about Kim that he traded her class ring for beer. Kim had to be number one on his crap list. In fact, this other girl, the one who Kim caught with the boyfriend, where is she now? What does she have to say about all this? What I'm saying is, sometimes figuring this all out isn't so simple. The conclusion you reach might have been attained too quickly. Sometimes it takes a lot more than 60 minutes. If you'd like to hear and read more of my in-depth analysis into the disappearance of Kim Moreau, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, sign up, and partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you.